What is so enticing about werewolves? What minds conjured the misfits that occupy the town of Langeley, Maine? And what is it about New England that's just so spooky? We have answers to these questions and more in today's bonus episode. We'll be talking to the writers behind Undertow Blood Forest just after this.
There's a special kind of thrill that comes with finally getting something that's been in your shopping cart or on your wish list for a while. And that feeling is even better if you know you got the best deal for it. That's why the savviest shoppers shop with Rakuten. They get the brands they love with the most savings and cash back. And you can get it too. The idea is simple. Stores pay Rakuten for connecting them with shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cashback. Start getting cashback at your favorite stores like Sephora, UGG, Levi's, and many more. Plus, Rakuten lets you stack sales on top of cashback, so you're not missing out on any other deals or rewards you might already be a part of. It's easy to use, and you get your cashback through PayPal or check. Download the free Rakuten app and never miss a deal. Or go to Rakuten.com to start getting the most bang for your buck. That's Rakuten.
#1 New York Times bestselling author Scott Sigler brings you The Rookie, Season 1 of the Galactic Football League series, a high-octane mashup of sci-fi, crime fiction, and sports, free wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, this is Fred Greenhalgh, your host of Undertow, Realms podcast, taking you under the surface and into the weird and the wicked. I'm also the creator of the werewolf-infused waking nightmare podcast we're experiencing, Blood Forest. But today we have a short reprieve from the horror of Langley, Maine, as we go behind the curtain and speak to the writing team who worked with me on this crazy podcast. We'll be learning a bit about their delightfully demented minds, talking about how to make horror work for audio, and the rich vein of real-life horrors we mined when creating this show. Enjoy the Blood Forest Writers Roundtable, featuring story producer Marco Palmieri and writers Sean French, Emma J. Gibbon, Morgan Sylvia, Bob LeBlanc, and creator yours truly. And if you're like, nah, I don't want to know how any of this works, just stay tuned. Next time, we'll be back with our regular journey into the Blood Forest.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Realms Roundtable discussion of our new Undertow series, Blood Forest. I'm Marco Palmieri, your host for the evening, and I'm here with the entire creative team of the show. Guys, please introduce yourselves. Fred, let's start with you.
All right, I'm Fred Greenhalgh, head of audio here at Realm, and the guy weirdly obsessed with werewolves up in Maine.
My name is Sean French. I'm a video game writer for Hyperkinetic Studios, and I dabble in comics, indie film, and obviously now audio fiction.
My name's Emma J. Gibbon, and I'm a horror writer who lives up in Maine.
My name's Bob LeBlanc. I am an actor, producer, podcast producer, writer. I own and run Sleuth's Mystery Entertainment, and I'm the showrunner for Balderdash Academy.
Hey, I'm Morgan Sylvia. I write horror, fantasy, poetry, screenplays, and also now audio fiction stuff. Also live in Maine.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys, for getting together today. I hope this will be a lot of fun. Really excited to talk about this show. It's Realm's newest horror podcast. It's all about werewolves, and I think I'd like to start with that, if that's okay. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the story and the characters and all that good stuff, I want to ask the question, why werewolves? It certainly has a long tradition in literature and other media.
Yeah.
Well, it also is time for it to come back. You know, it was big in the 40s with the Wolfman. There was another rise of werewolf fandom when you look at late 80s, early 90s with stuff like Werewolf the Apocalypse, which is a tabletop and live action game. And then it kind of went away and it was replaced by zombies and vampires. And I think we've come to the point in the cultural zeitgeist where your neighbor could be the big bad guy, where we're wondering who has that inner beast within them. If you're looking for a monster that fits our modern age, there is no better creature than a werewolf, than that hidden monster that lives next door.
Yeah, I think there's a real appeal also to the idea of just tearing away all the human trappings of life and abandoning societal rules and expectations and insecurities and just running off into the wilderness to be free.
Yeah.
You know, the more stressful life becomes, the more that sort of has some appeal to it. And unlike, you know, so many types of monsters just seem miserable. Vampires are always, they're just terribly unhappy. There's no, there's no happy vampires. But werewolves are having fun out there, you know, at least until the morning after.
I think it's perfect for audio as well. You know, like werewolves are hard to take serious. It's really hard to portray them in a way that doesn't become comic. But I think audio is perfect for that, because we're not going to have the mistake of, you know, our werewolf looking like a big teddy bear, you know, running around the woods or anything. So I think we're in a really great position to not only bring werewolves back, like Bob says, but to bring it back in this format as well. I think it's perfect for it.
And a lot of that's to bring them home. Maine has a history of lycanthropy. Between Maine and Quebec and that weird amorphous border that happened during the colonial period, we were the epicenter of what could be considered in folklore a werewolf outbreak. You know, Salem has their witches. Well, in northern Maine, up near the Canadian border, you have werewolves.
That's awesome.
I'm just going to throw this out there. We actually all are a werewolf pack, and we just finally have the opportunity to kind of come forward and sort of, you know, get rid of some of these misconceptions.
Secrets out. We're going to have to take that out in editing. Can't let anybody know.
Yeah. We just decided to come out of the light or come out of the shadows.
Yeah, we needed to break the silence. Well, and something that you said, Emma, which without being spoilery, I think is the heart of the story and part of what all these writers got immediately, which is that, you know, monster is in the eye of the beholder. And the fundamental thesis of how we were treating this was like the ability to turn into another being, another species, a wolf with all these superpowers is really, it's more a power. It is not a curse, and we kind of our mythology of how we and we took a lot of different, you know, pieces of the DNA from the culture, but it was more about the message that we're exploring in this story is what is a monster, and is the fact that you can turn into a wolf at night and run around and have power, have like super strength, actually the part that makes you a monster, or is it something else?
I would also throw in, kind of also echoing something that Emma said, is there's something about the beast within and that primal inner being where, you know, if you go back through history, like eventually at some point we all came from, you know, we all had that animal nature. And there's also, I think, an element of just losing control of yourself that is fascinating, that can be explored in so many, and has been explored in many ways. But there's something to these characters where, you know, they're tapping into something very primal within them. And I think that's something that is just kind of an eternal thing with humans. And I think that's part of why this particular mythology has such longevity in our culture.
Not to mention, they're just cool, man. I mean,
that too.
Bob, you had mentioned the 80s and 90s werewolf inspirations. You reminded me that 1995, I just Googled it, Gabriel Knight, The Beast Within, a Sierra adventure game.
Yeah.
Like those, and again, we have a video game writer here within Sean, like those were such great narratives back when Sierra was in the heyday. And that was just an excellent gothic werewolf horror video game. So that's all. But there was a scene in that where you got to become a werewolf. And so that, I think there's still that, like the probably parts of that and did influence Blood Forest of like, what does it actually feel like to be a werewolf? Like you got to be one in that game in a certain part. So that probably does, when we start thinking about the sound part of it, of like, what is it like? Yeah. How do you hear differently, et cetera. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Emma actually hit on one of the big things, I think, too. In why a werewolf story is so perfect for audio. Because I've worked on a lot of like independent films, and I mostly play monsters for obvious reasons. And there's a feeling that you never want to have that happens sometimes where you get on set and you realize the monster isn't going to work.
Yeah.
You realize it just doesn't play on camera, or it's going to look unintentionally funny, or it's a bad feeling, and it's a very common thing, and it's such a huge risk with werewolves, trying to get the transformation right. I mean, even the werewolf movies that I love butcher the transformation scene. You know, it's been done great like twice. You know, it's a very hard thing to do visually.
Audio, when it came to writing for the werewolf, was also a gift. We didn't have to worry about what the special effect budget was. We didn't have to worry about what the creature looked like. Are we going to go White Wolf style werewolf, wolf head? Are we going to do a hybrid? Are we going to do... We can leave that to Hitchcock. We can show enough through description and sound so that the makeup's always perfect. It's always what the audience wants. It's always what they see in their mind's eye. It is an amazing gift to write within this medium creatures that you couldn't practically bring to stage easily.
No, I mean, you try to, especially if you get into more than one creature. Now, I mean, there's a reason the werewolf movies tend to have one or maybe two, because trying more than that is madness. But, we have a little more room to play.
Yeah, we wrote a whole 400-year history of this.
Yeah, in 2 days and a month online. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Blood Forest specifically. It's got a rich cast of pretty messed up small town characters, especially the two leads, Frank and Eva. So what inspired the decision to focus on a Marine with PTSD and a vision-impaired teenager?
If I can, I think, again, why is this the perfect group of writers? I think everyone, well, first off, everybody here lives in Maine, lives in a small town, less is made up than some people may want to believe of this world. But also, and I think just it's really interesting I think it's kind of on some level like the long legacy of Stephen King of the kind of horror where it's take a conceit and put in some relatable characters and shake it up and see what happens. And the horror is just, it's ordinary people in an extraordinary situation. But I also, again, going, Emma, back to when you said the thing that was the reveal, we're not revealing, but there were certain things about Eva in particular that you were both sort of probing questions early on, but then became exciting. So I felt like you did really seem to connect with Eva early on. I'd love to hear your take on that question.
I think what I was really interested in, and it's going to be really hard not to give anything away, but I'll try. Cut this out, Fred. I think what I'm really interested in portraying are women that you usually don't see in media, in stories, that are given power and are not squashed down. So quite often when you see teen girls, especially teen girls who are maybe visually impaired, or whenever you see portrayals of them in movies or in stories, they're not allowed to have much power. Like if you think about The Craft with Nancy, she gets all this witch power, and then they squash. She has to be bound. They have to stop her. There's this idea that a teenage girl can't have power because she'll go crazy with it. She'll run wild. You have to bring her back in. She has to be the good girl. I'm not really interested in writing characters like that. So for me, for Eva, it was it's going to be a girl who's got it rough, but who's going to be a badass anyway. And she's someone who's going to be a full character that's not a person who we're giving power to so we can take it away. It's just so we can let her run with her life, if that makes sense.
And if I can pitch it to you, Morgan, I actually think it was you. Frank was originally written as a cop, and you had the idea to make him a veteran. And I think you also told me you had talked to other, like, if it's not inappropriate to say, like a Marine that you knew to sort of get some more background. So I think that part of Frank was from you. So I'd love to hear your take on Frank.
I can't recall if it was, I think it was probably more of an instinctive feeling. I just felt like we'd seen a lot of ex-cops, and part of the situation, I kind of felt like this guy maybe had like a different kind of weight on him, and just some kind of trauma that was following him. Frank is a very broken character, and just especially with, like, Maine, I can see it appealing to somebody who just kind of really wanted to get away and kind of maybe go into like maybe a little bit of kind of mini survival mode. I don't think this is a spoiler, but cut it if it is. The original thought was for, Frank and Raimi, their plan was to come up here and kind of get into like the wildlife and, hunting and fishing and stuff like that. And I could just sort of see those skills and that mindset, and also the hunter mindset. It's a different type, I think, of skill set. And I sort of felt like, I don't know. I just felt like that would maybe fit the character, and also just give him a different kind of depth than what we've seen before. And that would be very much a play against Eva, who has her own strengths, but they're very different than Frank's, as you see that kind of evolve throughout the story.
I think Sean really hit something on the head with Frank about being a werewolf is fun. You get to run around the woods all night, but then when you wake up in the morning, and isn't that Frank all over in various aspects of his character? Like, he lets loose at night in many different ways because of his PTSD and things like that. His drink,
his alcohol, yeah.
And so he does that too.
Yeah, I kind of connected with Frank. My father-in-law lives with us, and he was a Vietnam vet. And I work from home. My wife doesn't, so I'm his primary kind of day-to-day helper and stuff. And so I live with PTSD up close every day. And I definitely was able to lean on my experience there with Frank and Marie both. A lot of stuff I'm kind of pulling from real experiences and things that I've seen in the kind of day-to-day life of living with some of those struggles.
Yeah. I really connected writing for Eva. So, I mean, I grew up as a gifted kid with disabilities, learning disabilities. And what really impressed me about how Eva was coming along was that so often we see characters in media that let their, not even disability, but let whatever bad hand they were given define who they are. So they become a character of unmet potential rather than a real fleshed out person with strengths and abilities and weaknesses that they've managed to find a way to deal with and to manage for their entire life. And I really saw an opportunity in Eva to show that if you're dealt a bad hand, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's who you are. You're the kid who can't see well. You're the kid who's legally blind. That's not really how life works. That is an aspect of you, but it does not define you. That's the way I deal with my ADHD. You find a way to find the benefits within the disorder, and you find a way to manipulate it to your advantage. And I saw a lot of that parallel with Eva.
I just agree. I think that's one of the really special things about Eva's character is that you see her weaknesses turning into her strengths over the course of the story.
Yeah, and as a former, a fellow former bullied kid who got into martial arts to kind of find their own power, her journey kind of speaks to me on that front too.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and I think this ties into another question you may be thinking of asking, Marco, is that, so we had an amazing consultant in the writer's room with us, Elsa, I think it's Shunison is how you say your last name. Elsa was amazing. And I think this is the part that is really, you have to be really careful about in audio, because I think because there's no visual component. The number of shows that have like some pitch and the character is blind is like pretty deeply problematic. And there, I mean, it's problematic in lots of media, but it's like sort of especially in audio where characters with vision disabilities are just sort of like thrown in as a plot device. And that's not who Eva is. It is, as I said, it's like it kind of just is an organic part of her character, and it's and she just sort of is doing her thing, and it's far from the only like thing that makes her othered in this community. Like, she also lost her parents young. She's caring for this grandmother. She's from French Canadian, which is not the dominant culture in the town. So these are all just things of like complex characters who are dealing with real stuff. And yeah, we I'm sure we didn't do everything perfectly, but we put quite a lot of thought into giving her own complete story.
Rex Sherman is a demon that walks among us, a predator that ruined families.
The Lisk podcast team was shocked by the recent news of Rex Howerman's arrest in connection with the Gilgo 4 murders. After more than a decade of searching, law enforcement officials finally pieced together enough evidence to bring formal charges against him. I'm your host, Chris Moss, and the Lisk podcast will be releasing new episodes every week to unpack how Howerman was caught. We'll track developments in the case, as well as conduct interviews with officials and witnesses familiar to all the troubling details. We are relieved by the arrest, but with new information coming to light every day, there's still so much to learn. Look for new episodes every week, and if you haven't already, please listen to seasons 1 and 2 of Lisk Long Island Serial Killer wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, so you guys touched a little bit about Maine. So why is it that horror stories set in Maine work so well? I mean, is it just because Stephen King has gotten us used to the idea that all sorts of crazy shit can happen in one state? Or what is it about Maine that just lends itself to horror?
So Maine is the least populated state in New England. It's the only state in the Union only bordered by one other state. We are isolated from the rest of the country for a reason. There's not a lot of people up here, but there is a distinct prejudice within the people that are. Where are your ancestors from plays a lot of where you used to fit into society in Maine. Were you Quebecois? Were you French? Parisian? Like, did you come over after the Revolution? Were you native? Were you English? Were you Scot? Were you Irish? Like, that mattered more, I think, than people realize. Where in the state are you from? Are you from a mill town? Are you coastal? I mean, we have lobstermen, mountains, forests. We even have a desert, if you believe the marketing. It is its own microcosm without a lot of people. There's a lot of tract of nothing in the middle of the state. So it's the perfect setting for horror. And some of us still grew up with those fairy tales. We have the Kawakwa. We have, which is similar to a Wendigo. Think of like an angry, cannibalistic Bigfoot, right? We have Fey legends in the west, south, down around Berkshire's, Berwick, Maine, rather, down around where I'm from, Buxton, Standish has them. Buxton in and of itself could be its own setting. There's a lot of Buxton in Langley. So it is remote, and that remoteness and extreme views and old-fashioned views, it kind of lends itself to horror.
It's creepy, Bob, though. That's what it's just creepy. It's naturally creepy.
It really is.
It really is.
I live kind of in a remote area as well. And I remember I was gone for 20 years and I came back, and coming back was kind of like coming into a whole new universe again. And I remember this one night, my first winter back, I was driving home and it was really, really, really foggy that night. And where I live, there are coy wolves. And as I pulled up to the house, I couldn't see more than 10 feet away from where I was. but I could hear them. And I just remember thinking that night, okay, this is the kind of night where Stephen King comes up with The Mist. There's a lot to be said for just looking into these forests and all these little twists and turns, and you just don't know what's out there just out of view. And it is very remote, very wooded. And there's just kind of like a pragmatism here, I think, like between the winters and like the cold can kill you. Make no joke, if you are stuck in the middle of nowhere and your car breaks down on a blizzard, you are in a life-threatening situation. So there's always kind of a little, I think, awareness of, Mother Nature and the unknown and the unseen. Interesting, we don't really have any big natural predators, but there's a lot of just like untouched wilderness, and it's like you can sort of tell there are just stories here, that speak to us. I think all of us differently, maybe, but there's a lot of nooks and crannies that are very interesting in this state too.
The environment itself, it's definitely, we've all been there in the position where it was a hot April morning. There was snow on the ground when we went to bed. It might have been 30 the night before. It's 60 that morning, and the snow goes from a solid to a gas. It does not hit, it sublimates. I've seen fog so thick in Maine that you couldn't see the front of your car while you were driving it. Like, that's not uncommon.
You're reminding me of both of you of the house I grew up in, and just as like a sort of a state of facts of like what a normal upbringing in Maine is like. 200-year-old farmhouse is not an uncommon place to live. That place is gonna creak and moan in the winter wind, and this was in down East Maine, so fog was a fairly omnipresent set decoration, and we had this like huge oak tree that had grown large too close to the house. And this was, before weatherization was a thing people thought about. So it had like those single pane glass windows that in modern homes that are, properly insulated, you don't get this. But like on a good cold winter night, I'm from my bedroom, it's like the whole house is moaning and groaning. And you get this like the moon behind a tree, looming over you like tick, 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 tick,
yeah.
tick, tick, tick. Tick, 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 and that's just, and then you have an older brother who tells you ghost stories, and then you end up like me.
Yeah, I've lived in a lot of places, and Maine is uniquely strange. It's like it's dark at 4 p.m. You're snowed in all winter. Everybody's all stir crazy. You've got like hundreds of miles of uncharted wilderness. There's like whole sections of the state that are technically unorganized territory that don't even have a local government. It's just madness. Even aside from Stephen King, Maine is just a verifiable freak show.
Well, and you have these characters, and a lot of them you do see in Blood Forest who are a little bit hard to pin down, of someone who is like a libertarian nut job on the edge of town with like razor wire over all their burnt out cars and a bunch of guns, but who like will legitimately save your life if you're found on a dark road late at night. And the person who might actually kill you is the person who lives in the nice house in town who wears a nice suit to church on Sunday. And Maine is both those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also the fisher screaming in the woods just randomly. Yeah. Like just an animal that screams like a woman being murdered randomly in the night for no reason.
And fox do the same thing, and lynx do the same thing. Most of the cool animals in Maine scream.
He met you.
Or they make ghost calls like loons. It's, it's a spooky place. We've all had been in one situation. Like for me, it was going out and getting wood for the furnace. If we didn't do our chores before the sunset, then we were going to load up the wood stove at night. You're walking out to the far back of your property to load in logs onto your sled to drag it across. All you can think about is what's in the woods.
So when I was little, my grandmother's sister told me this story about there being like wells in the forest, and that I could like just walk and fall into a hole walking over leaves. And I was really scared walking around in the little woods behind my house. I would always be afraid that like the woods would eat me and I'd fall down this hole. So that's like the kind of thing that you grow up with around here. I never did fall down a well, but yeah, I was paranoid about that for a long time.
Yeah.
We also grew up with the legends of the intense cruelty of man, especially in Maine. You hear about what the colonists did to the natives when they arrived, how there's a legend down near where I grew up about one of the colonists grabbing a native child and throwing it into the Saco River to see if it would swim. These are not uncommon stories that we were told in school about literally the place right behind where you're going.
Yeah, the Saco River, where we used to go swimming as a kid, that was the legend, is that the river claims a child every year as retaliation for that. Yeah.
So...
And that's just like, yeah, okay, let's go.
And now we're going to go back to school.
Yeah.
This will be fine. Nothing to worry about, children. So,
as the native New Yorker in the room, you guys are freaking me out, all right?
But it's totally fine. People come here and they're from a city like I'm worried about this. Yeah. It's so dark. No, you're fine. The woods are not going to tell you. It's actually fine.
So here's the thing. So where I'm from originally is Yorkshire. So, and the American Werewolf in London, the scene where they're like, keep to the path and there's that pub. I'm from there. That's where I originally am from. So when I say, oh yeah, Maine's pretty creepy, then you know the level I'm talking about.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous.
So Marco, it could also be a cultural reflex or reaction to the fact that we don't have any more large predators. We don't have natural disasters, really.
But much of the folk stories you describe depict large predators, like the cannibalistic Bigfoot you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Well, and before the Europeans arrived, there were, there were wolves in Maine. There were mountain lions. There were, black bears aren't really ever an issue. There were not brown bears in Maine, but there used to be. And a lot of the legends that we grow up with living within the state culturally and some that really are passed down by family to family are memories of that time. And that wasn't a long time ago. Maine goes back, 400 years of European settlement? That's old for the rest of the country. Emma, is that old?
That's really not old. Was I pulling my face like that's not old?
Well, that's the thing is that in the grand scheme of human generations, that's not a long time ago. And Maine itself has changed since then. There was a time where most of southern Maine was clear-cut and resembled closer to Ireland and Scotland than it does Maine today. We live in a second-growth forest. But that's also, I think, what makes Maine special is it has a very rich storyteller tradition. Maine humorists are a thing.
Because it's so damn cold and the winter is long.
Yeah. What are you going to do when you're stuck inside all winter?
Yeah, but it's something that I don't see celebrated in a lot of other places.
Right. And that was one of the fun things in when we first started breaking down the story. My goal was to tie everything into actual Maine history.
Yeah.
That the more we don't, the less of the backstory we have to invent whole cloth, the better, was kind of my thinking. So the first thing I did was start looking through state history for kind of werewolf adjacent events that might like match up in interesting ways. And one of the first things I found is that the Maine Silver Rush, which was like 1878 to 82, happened during the same period that the wolves were extirpated from Maine.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting coincidence from a storytelling standpoint. When I saw that those two things matched up, that newspapers in Maine in the 1850s are full of stories of people being attacked by wolves. And by 1890, 8 years after the Silver Rush, you have letters to the editor from people who are denying that wolves ever lived in Maine.
Yeah.
So something happened there, and that seems like a really interesting spot. And then once you're like, okay, we match those up, so where were the silver mines? Would it make sense to be one in an area like Langley? So you start pulling up geological maps and you find, you're like, yes. And you're like, okay, now you've got this real story element there that you can kind of build on, and that's all anchored in real history.
And that tied in, I mean, even werewolves themselves. We found that there were Quebec werewolf sightings. There was a big mass hysteria within Quebec about werewolves, which historians think it might have come directly over from the beast of Gévaudan. I have a French last name. I don't speak French. The werewolf mass hysteria that happened in France. And some of those people in the folklore came over to Quebec, and that's where it grew, and it eventually made its way down into Maine. So when you start taking a look at all of these pieces and how all of these historical elements play into each other and build on each other, there's a lot of real history behind Langley. Even the whole region.
Yeah, and I'm bummed that Morgan's internet is not cooperating, because she pulled some wonderfully ancient tomes of werewolf text, and when we talked a little bit about the mythology, but like we kind of went deep. And one of the things I think it was she that discovered was like how there's sort of this common ancestor between vampirism, witches, and werewolves, which all sort of come from this like discomfort around women who could not be controlled. And so suddenly weird legends start to surround them, and terrible things happen to them in these patriarchal towns. But that whole journey of those like legends, which are, European legends from like 1400 or older, and how they end up in a town in Maine in 2022 is a pretty fascinating journey.
Yeah.
To all of you out there, thanks for listening to the show, and stick around for future episodes of Blood Forest. The best is yet to come.
And those were the writers behind Undertow Blood Forest. Hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about how this crazy show was made. And stay tuned next time for our next installment as we walk deeper into the Blood Forest.
Greetings, adventurers. Today we're excited to introduce you to a new story, Dark Dice, a horror podcast that blurs the line between actual play and audio drama, where the story is determined by the roll of the dice. 6 adventurers embark on a journey into the ruinous domain of the Nameless God. They will never be the same again. One of the players is not what they seem after a doppelganger, a creature that can assume the form and voice of whatever it kills, infiltrates the team. As the players are picked off and replaced one at a time, can they figure out who the monster is before it's too late? Can you? Here's a quick example of what our show sounds like.
The shambler with the jar of liquid inside of him.
Soren Arkwright let loose an arrow that cracked the glass, passing through the spine of the creature. The shambler still managed to maintain its forward momentum, but stumbled as it eagerly tried to bite and swipe at Soren, landing near his feet.
As Jeff Goldblum has now joined our cast, Dark Dice is available however you listen to podcasts.
Undertow is a production of Realm, hosted by Fred Greenhalgh. Today's bonus episode was edited by Corey Barton and produced by Marco Palmieri, Nicole Otto, and Rhoda Beleza. Undertow is produced by Mary Asadolahi and Haley Weigreich. Associate produced by Nicole Kreuter and Alexis Slatshaw. Executive produced by Fred Greenhalgh, Molly Barton, and Marcy Wiseman. Undertow theme by Hubert Campbell. Cover art by Kendall Thomas. Find more shows like Undertow by following Realm on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at realm.fm.